Today I want to share with you the story of a young gentleman who came to me who has an increasingly successful business and who realized that by going overseas and keeping more of his money, he can create incredible generational wealth. It's easier to do when you're younger, but anyone can do this. I'm going to run through some of the numbers that I shared with him and tell you how important it is to go offshore, to give to your community, to give to your family. We're going to go through the numbers right now. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. Here at Nomad Capitalist, I've spent over a dozen years building a team of over 30 people, curating a network of experts around the world, all to help the 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs go where you're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. This is a story of a gentleman who is 25 years old, and he's really doing very well in business. In fact, just a couple months ago, he crossed the $1 million per year threshold. He's now doing in the low $1 million range, 1.1, 1.2. And he came to me because he said, when I crossed that $1 million income threshold, I realized I needed to call you because now I'm in a whole different league. And I realized how much money I am giving away from where he lives in Idaho in the United States, kind of a moderate tax state. He's paying very high levels of U.S. federal tax. He's paying something to Idaho. He, of course, pays Social Security, Medicare tax. He's got the full slate of taxes. And he's told me, he said, I'm paying about $35,000 a month in tax. Every quarter, he goes and files a quarterly estimate, and it's about $100,000. And he said, at 25 years old, he said, I'd like to eventually get married, eventually have a family. He said, I see these years ahead of me as an opportunity to save as much money as possible to not only be a good father in the future and be able to spend a lot of time with his children and with his wife and with his family and not have to be always at work. He said, I want to put in the work now to build this thing as big as I can and then eventually slow down. But, he said, I want to make sure I leave a legacy for my family. He came from a pretty middle-class background, and he said, I want to make sure that I leave something to my family and to some causes that I care about. Because my parents, they're not going to be able to do that. They're, barely getting by themselves. And, maybe I'll even support my parents. Anyway, let's go through some of the numbers. So I said, basically, there's two stories. I said, the one story is you can stay in the United States, and from, person-to-person experience, you're going to be a lot more likely to want to keep up with the Joneses because you're surrounded by people who are going to, your family, your friends, who are going to say, why don't you buy the next biggest car? Why don't you buy the more expensive house? They're going to continually push you to spend more and to keep up with the Joneses. And so you're going to keep paying $400,000 and some in taxes a year. Certainly you can live in Idaho or pretty much anywhere in the world to some standard at $700,000 a year that's left over. But you're going to be spending more of that $700,000. You're probably not going to be saving as much. And so that's the first story. I said, let's take the second story. Let's say you move overseas and you go offshore fully, and we can reduce the tax rate to pretty close to zero. You can keep more of your own money. And let's just say you keep living on the $700,000. You're not going to. You're going to live on less because you'll have a very luxurious lifestyle somewhere else, but you're not going to buy stuff you don't want, right? Like, I'm not a car guy, for example. And I told him this. I said, I could go out and buy an Aston Martin, I guess, but I don't want an Aston Martin. But I honestly think if I were living in the U.S., I actually remember I had a client who became a friend in an old business. I picked him up in my car one time. He said, you're doing all this business and this is the car you drive? He said, listen, I would respect you if you drove a piece of crap truck. But if you're not going to do that, you should go, as high as you can go. And so I probably would have listened to him eventually. I would have, gone and bought the Bentley. But and for some people that's great. I have one family right now. They're buying a $1 million car. I don't even know what a $1 million car is, but they're buying a $1 million car. It's coming, who knows when. But for me, it would just be a waste of a couple $100,000 because I wouldn't get the appreciation that they will from the car. And I told them the same thing. Whatever it is that you like, you'll continue to buy overseas. If you like gourmet foods, you'll buy gourmet foods. But you won't buy stuff you don't need and you don't want. So anyway. So the second story is he goes overseas. We're going to take that $35,000 a month. We're going to invest it rather conservatively, just so you can make 5% of that money, okay? 10 years goes by, now you're 35 years old. Maybe you're married by now, maybe even you have a child. Okay. And so now you can take that 35 grand a month. At 5%, you're not going to make a fortune, but you know it's there for you. And so you'll have about $5.42 million, about $5.5 million come 10 years from now. Obviously, this works no matter what your age, but certainly impressive when you're 35 years old. And I said, okay, what are you going to do with the business in 10 years? He said, well, maybe I'll sell it. I'd like to build it up and sell it. Okay. So let's say we build it up. He gave me some revenue numbers. Let's say you sell it for, $10 million. Potentially, depending on where capital gains tax rates go, you save anywhere from $2 to $4 million by fully going overseas. And so we've got 5.5 from the investments. We've got between 2 and 4. Let's just call it in the middle at 3. We've got $8.5 million, right? And so now you can invest that money. And so from 35 to 60, you can invest, or from 65, so the next 30 years until the standard retirement age. You can be retired. You can figure. You can take some money out. But we said, if you just make 5% on that $8.5 million, you're going to have about, close to $40 million by the time you're 65 years old. That's a pretty good legacy. If you earn a higher rate of return, 7%, you're somewhere in the 60s. And if you put it in more aggressive stuff, you put it in stock market and historical returns, or you put it in cryptocurrency, whatever you put it in, and you get 10% return, 12% return. I mean, you're talking about centimillionaire status. And so you've worked from 25 to 35 years old. Okay, you worked before that, you were building up the business, but for those 10 key years where you were able to accumulate income, save it conservatively, and then retire and just push that money forward for the rest of your life, we're talking about, you're still living on the 700 grand, by the way, right? Or you're setting aside some of that 700 grand in a separate savings account for 35 to 65 if you just want to do nothing, rather than running a smaller business. But potentially you could have $100 million simply by moving out of Idaho and going to a place where your business is treated better, and where they say, you know what, we think you get to keep most, if not all, of your money. I mean, going and living for 10 years in Dubai, or potentially in Singapore, or in Panama City, or just traveling around the world. There are many different ways you could do it. But the difference for those 10 years of building up the business, by the way, this doesn't assume the business gets any bigger. I mean, he's building the business, and I think he'll build the business faster when he's keeping more of the money, because it's more motivation, right? This assumes he's not going to grow the business at all, which the $10 million figure does. But anyway, we're talking like $100 million potentially, depending on how aggressive you are in investing it. And if you want to leave a legacy, if you want to leave gifts to causes that you care about, if you want to set your kids up. Now, we were talking, and I won't share all of his personal comments, but we were talking, how much should you leave to your kids? If I have $100 million, I'm not giving my kids $100 million. I don't feel so good about that. But at least you have the freedom to do so. And it's so powerful, this compound interest, especially when you're young. But really, when you're talking about taking a tax rate from 40% down to 0 or 2 or 5, it's still pretty powerful no matter how old you are. And so forget being able to reinvest that money. Forget being able to buy houses and create your trifecta. Forget all the stuff that we normally talk about. For me, one thing that I've really been thinking about the last couple of years is the power of doing this to create the next stage beyond that, which is this generational wealth. I know some folks think, the next generation will squander it. Listen, you can set up trusts, you can set up foundations that do charitable work, you can do whatever you want with it, right? And your legacy can live on for generations. A lot of people want their families to have advantages that they didn't have, because even though I grew up in a successful family, when I turned 18, my parents said, we're not giving you anything. They helped me out with college because they had saved some money, and my grandmother had saved some money, but I wasn't given loans. They didn't invest in my company. They didn't, give me money. I don't have any inheritances. And I think that made me a stronger entrepreneur. And so, for beyond just the idea of how do I accumulate more wealth is what happens next. It's a great question I like asking is, okay, and what next? and what next and what next. And at the very end, what happens after you've accumulated all this money and it all comes to an end? What is the legacy going to be? And I think that, the power of, trading Idaho for so many other places in the world to, have 40 or 60 or $100 million that you can do, and you can do whatever you want with it, right? You can leave whatever legacy that you want to do, but at least now you have the option that you wouldn't have had nearly as readily living in Idaho. I've talked to people who, make $1 million, similar amounts of money. I had a guy who lived in New York City. He's not saving much at all between the crazy taxes, the cost of living. He's like, if I put away, 75 grand a year, I'm doing okay after private schools and all this kind of stuff. And it's a huge difference. It's a long-lasting difference, and it's really a game changer in terms of legacy. So beyond all the instant effects that we talk about of having an extra $420,000 a year and growing for him to spend, that's something that I think could inspire some of you, that the numbers at the end of the day are a lot bigger than what you're seeing when you look at your tax return. That's something to think about. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.